How much Spark do you own? How many properties do you have? In this video, I'm going to give you some insight as to how you rank against some of the top players in Upland. I'm also going to show you an alternative way of looking at properties that are on sale and how to search for good deals. Upland is not a competitive game in the sense that the person who has the most properties or the person who has the most Spark is going to win something special. Every player has their own strategy, and there are many ways to succeed in this metaverse. There are some players who invest thousands of dollars into this game, and there are plenty of people who start playing for free. It's important to keep that in mind before we look at this data. All of the data that you see in this video was taken on September 1st, 2022. Lastly, none of this is financial advice. Everyone should do their own research. The first graph that we can see here details the number of properties that people own. There's going to be a lot of statistics in here, and I'm going to do my best to explain some of the important points, so don't be afraid. I will walk you guys through this. The first thing that we see here is N, which is the number of data points that we have. 273,098 people own at least one property in the metaverse. We can see that the minimum is one property, and the maximum is 16,478 properties. So that is quite the range here. The question is, how do we see that distributed? What percentage of the players have very few properties versus what percentage have a lot of properties? On the bottom part of this graph, we can see here the number of properties, and on the y-axis, the number of players that own that many properties. So here we can see the number of players that own one property is almost 70,000. And naturally, we can see that as the number of properties increase, there are fewer number of players that own that many properties. We can see here that after 20, it gets a lot smaller. And if I scroll out to the tens and hundreds and even thousands, we can see that the data is almost at zero. So that's why I have it zoomed in so close to zero. And also because we can have a better indication of what's going on up here on the top half of the graph. Here we can see the different quantiles. And what that means is if you rank all the players from lowest to highest number of properties that they own, where do you rank? So the minimum, as we said, is one property. And if we look at 25% of all the players, 25% only own one property. If we go up to the 50th percentile, which is the median, the middle player, which is about 140,000, have 3 properties or less. And if we get up here to 75%, which means 3 out of 4 players in the game have 8 properties or less. And we can see these percentiles shown here on the top half of this graph. And this is actually called a box graph. So this first line here is our 25th percentile. It also happens to be our minimum. Those are the same. Here we have the median, which is the 50th percentile, and the third line here, which completes this box, is the 75th percentile. So we can see that 75% of the players have 8 properties or less. This next line out here is a calculated maximum. We can see that all of the points that are beyond that line are actually shown as dots. They all appear to be a line here, a thick line, but these are in fact hundreds of data points, and each one of them is a dot. Everything to the right of this maximum line are considered outliers. So if you have more than 18 properties, you are considered an outlier. That means that you are not part of the regular data set. My interpretation of that is that if you own more than 18 properties, you are likely to be more engaged in the game. This calculated maximum is based off of the third quartile and the first quartile. Finishing off this table, if you have 20 or more properties, you are in the top 10% of players who own the most properties. And if you have 65 or more, you're in the top 2.5%. The top 0.5% of players own more than 277 properties in the game. Next, I'm going to talk about these summary statistics. The first one, which is also an important metric, is the mean. And a mean is actually another word for average. So on average, each player in Upland owns 12.8 properties. Now you're probably saying, well, that takes into account all of these players who only own one property and also the players who own thousands of properties. It's clear that this player who owns 16,000 properties is skewing the data to the right. and players who only own one property is skewing the data to the left. So what we're looking at here with the upper 95 and lower 95% mean means that if we only look at the top 95% of the players or bottom 95% of the players, what is that average? And we can see those data points right here. The top of this diamond indicates the mean itself, that being 12.8, and the start and finish of the diamond indicate the lower 95% mean and the upper 95% mean. So we can see that since this diamond is quite squished together, there isn't really that big of a difference. And visually we can look and see where exactly is the average compared to the median. When looking at this graph and a lot of the other graphs that I'm going to show you, I think the median is a much better indicator as to where you actually rank. The average takes into account, in this case, all of the different properties, but the median takes into account the rank, the place you are in terms of all the other players, and not looking at how many properties they own. But by looking at the median, you can say, am I in the top half or the bottom half in terms of the rankings of these players? This next distribution graph that we are looking at is in terms of Spark. And what we can see here is just absolutely crazy. There is one player that has 598 Spark. Some of the biggest Spark owners are in fact the partnerships that Upland has created with some major brands. And I've actually removed those data points from this data. So there is a player that has almost 600 Spark, and the second has only 55. Now, when I start to zoom in, we will start to see more of the picture that we saw in our previous graph. Again, for starters, we can see that there are 126,558 Spark owners, and that is 46% of all the property owners. So almost half of the players in Upland have at least 0.01 Spark. Now, Spark is a really important resource in this game. If you don't have any or you don't know what it is, take a look at the video in the upper right-hand corner to learn more. Right now, you can actually get Spark for free just by logging in every day for 7 days straight. There are lots of other ways that you can accumulate Spark as well, and you can read about that in the link in the description below. Here we can see the median, which again is 50% of the players have 0.12 Spark or less. And now when I say 50% of players, I'm referring to 50% of the players that own Spark. So since 45% of the players own Spark, 50% of those would be about 22%. So you have about 75% of players who have less than 0.12 Spark in the game. Now here, 75% of the players who have Spark own 0.26 Spark or less. And that is actually almost 90% of all the players in the game. So you can actually receive approximately 0.26 Spark just by logging in every day from the time that this feature was announced. So if you aren't logging in every day, you absolutely should be. And if you want to be in the top 0.5% of the players who own Spark, which is the top 0.2% of all players in the game, you need to have 6.5 Spark or more. The next graph that I want to show you is actually how I like to analyze the different neighborhoods when I'm looking for a property to buy. Lots of people look at floor prices or markup percentage, but I like to also use this tool. It doesn't give me all the answers, but it does give me some interesting insight when comparing different neighborhoods. Here you're looking at the exact same box plot as you saw before. It's just listed vertically here as opposed to what you saw previously as horizontal. And I'm looking at two different neighborhoods. One is Portage Park in Chicago, and the second one is also in Chicago, titled South Chicago. I'm not sure if there is anything special about South Chicago or how it actually compares to Portage Park, but I do know that Portage Park is a node. They have built a community around that neighborhood and are providing value to the people who own properties in that neighborhood. So here again, we see that the bottom line here is the minimum listing price of a property in this neighborhood. The second line is the 25th percentile, which means that 25% of the properties that are listed for sale are listed at this price or below. And here we can see for Portage Park, the 25th percentile is 37,887 UPIX, compared to South Chicago, which is 20,000. And we can see that the median 75th percentile and the calculated maximum are significantly higher for Portage Park than for South Chicago. We can also see that the minimum, which is the floor price in Portage Park, is 14,990 UPIX compared to 7,150 in South Chicago. So here we can compare not only the floor prices, but we can see the distribution of the listing prices of properties in each neighborhood. And here I've added another neighborhood of Hyde Park, and this is actually a limited collection neighborhood. We can see here how Portage Park compares to a neighborhood where there is nothing special in that from my understanding, and also compared to a limited collection neighborhood. What I've done now is I've turned on all the different data points. So we can see here in Portage Park and in South Chicago, there are just a lot of properties that are on sale. So if you were to buy the floor price here, not much will change. However, if you wanted to buy a few properties in Hyde Park, you might be able to move this floor up a lot faster. And that's because in Hyde Park, there are fewer properties that are on sale. And also, you have quite a large gap between the minimum and the 25th percentile. Now, when I add this fourth neighborhood of Russian division, you can actually see that because there are fewer properties, we can see that if I buy this floor property, I will be able to raise the floor quite a lot from 85,000 UPIX to 127,000 UPIX. Again, not financial advice, but if you're looking to raise the floor in a specific neighborhood, it would be a lot smarter to take a look at a neighborhood like Russian Division, where you have such large gaps between some of these lower data points. If you were able to buy just a few properties in this neighborhood, you would be able to shift this entire box plot up quite a lot compared to a Portage Park or a South Chicago. I mentioned that this graph is just one indicator and it doesn't give me all the answers. Some of the things that are missing from here are the actual markup percentages and the original base price of each neighborhood. It's hard to compare some of these neighborhoods if I don't know what the original base price is. One would have to normalize this data so it's all on level playing field. I also don't know how many properties are in each one of these neighborhoods. It would be interesting to know what percentage of the neighborhood is actually listed for sale. If there are a lot of people trying to sell the properties, maybe there's a reason for that. When I look for specific properties to buy, there are a lot of factors that go into it, and this is just one of the many tools that I use. Having everything stored on the blockchain offers up a lot of opportunity for people who like data like myself to do these types of analyses. All of the data is publicly available. It then comes down to making sense of all of the information that is here. And in addition to the Upland Guide teaching you about how to play Upland, I also look forward to doing these types of analyses in the future, and let me know if there's anything interesting that you'd like looking at.